Midwest Whitetail is brought to you by Realtree, Hoyt Archery, Muddy Outdoors, Fuse Accessories, Trophy Rock, Frigid Forage, Scott Archery, Cabela's, Rocket Broadheads, Woods Zero Turn Mowers, Bloodsport Arrows, Redneck Hunting Blinds, Scentmaster, Yeti Coolers, TrailCamPro.com, ScentLock, and Nikon.
Welcome to Midwest Whitetail. Normally we'd be looking for shed antlers now, but instead we're shoveling snow and trying to figure out when spring's finally going to get here. But on today's episode, I'm standing at a spot right now that we call the open gate by the cabin. And the stand is to my right, and I'm going to really talk about this stand setup in today's episode and explain to you how it works and why it works, and we'll cover that in some detail. But we're also going to dive into some coyote trapping with Jim Ryser and take on another segment that Jeremy Flynn and I covered while we were in the office talking about the deer survey on our farm. And we're going to talk about buck-to-doe ratio and what's ideal, you know, the ratio that I've got on this farm, and just kind of break that down. So let's talk about the stand first. The stand itself is in this tree about 15 yards away to my right, but what really makes this spot click is the way that it sets up. In front of me here is a large, probably 20-some acre ag field, but behind me is about a 1 acre clover plot, and that's the classic staging area. This is one of those things that we've really been evolving over the years, is this strategy of using these small food plots next to larger ag fields as staging areas. This one works really well. It's really just a classic example of that, and the main reason why I want to talk about this stand, because this is something that you can do in the area where you hunt too. It's not that hard to do. If you've got any kind of an opening, like I said, just inside the cover from a larger ag field, you've got the perfect setup for one of these staging areas. This one's got a lot of cedar trees around it and it's set up on a ridge. So there's a lot of bedding area around the back side of this staging area behind me. You know, this 1 acre food plot. So the deer come out of those bedding areas, they group up in that 1 acre clover plot, and then as it starts to get on towards evening, then they come on through this little open gate behind me, right behind me, and out into this ag field. It's a classic, really, like I said, and there's a couple reasons for it. Obviously, I'm getting close range shots, which is super important when you're bow hunting. Secondarily, because the deer are moving past you before the end of the day, it's not too hard to get out of the spot without bumping deer at the end of legal shooting time. In this case, I've done it many times where I've climbed down out of the stand and dropped off the backside away from the ag field and snuck out past this line of cedar trees going back to my vehicle. Come in on this side, stay clear away from the deer that might be bedded over here. Come in on this side of the cedar trees, sometimes actually coming right down through the standing corn, pop into the stand, and then at the end of legal shooting time, drop down off the backside and use those cedars for screen and slip out in that direction. So it works really well for a couple reasons. Close range shots before the end of legal shooting time, because you got the deer in their comfort zone in this smaller food plot. Then you've got the easy exit at the end of legal shooting time. So if you have anything like this in the area where you hunt, consider converting it into one of these staging area food plots, because this has really worked well, very well. We look for spots like this as many places as we can find them on the farm. Over the years, we've had some really good hunts from the stand location. Jordan our daughter had a crack at a nice buck during the youth season 2 or 3 years ago, and she shot just under the deer. And then Drew shot his first bow kill from that stand. That deer did the same thing, staged up in the food plot, and then it came on, and that one actually turned and went across in front of the stand rather than coming through this open gate. I've actually killed other deer from this stand before we started filming, so it's been a really productive stand for me over the years. When it comes to wind direction on this spot, I like to hunt it with a straight north wind, so that would be blowing down along this line of cedars. That keeps it from blowing out into the field, so any deer that do get past me first before the end of legal shooting time, maybe a few does will roll through, or maybe deer come in from other directions out into the ag field, they're not picking me up. Then of course the deer that are coming from the bedding area through the staging area, they're not picking me up either. So this one sets up nice. I mean, it's got a couple of different wind directions that work really well with it. North, northeast will work. We get a lot of those kind of winds in November and December. We've killed a lot of deer out of this tree stand, a lot of does during late season hunts too. So it's been a super productive spot, and hopefully you can find something like this in the area where you hunt. Next, let's join Jim Ryser as he talks about some of the tips for trapping coyotes, and then we'll go right from that into that segment with Jeremy and I talking about buck-to-doe ratios.
Well, it's February 15th, and this coyote season has really been pretty difficult with the snow, mostly, and also with just the lack of coyotes. I think we did a pretty good job last year. Today, what I'm planning on doing is tearing this hay bale set down behind me that we set up early season. I've not seen any tracks here at all, so I'm going to go ahead and tear this set down. I'm going to take the two traps, I'm going to set them up next to a signpost, and basically what that means is that you find where they urinate, the males urinate, just a signpost, set some traps nearby that area. You don't bait them or do anything, so I'm going to show you how we do those. I'm also going to move this one that was on the fingertip a little closer to the woods. I think with the snow and everything and very little cover, it's making the coyotes a little bit more skittish. Going to go ahead and rebait a few of them and relure them. Well, we've got coyotes running everywhere through this area here. We're going to do a post set right now. These coyotes are probably cruising through this area and marking as they cruise. We're also going to set one at this little funnel here at the gate right behind me, and then I think we'll be, this is the only other two traps that I have, and then we'll be done with setups. The thing that's really nice about this area, this is a great place where rabbits are hanging out, so these coyotes are walking by hoping to scare something up and get them moving. My hope is that they're going to smell this meat and this lure. I'm going to put coyote gland lure on it. No other kind of lure at this point. That way they'll think another coyote's been here and they'll be free to get in here and try this out. We're using another Minnesota trap. We're using one of the ones we cut from the south side. Gonna add some hulls, cover it up, and get out of here. All right, all I want to do is just get the top layer of snow off. Again, I use these hulls and they're naturally waxed, so it really helps it so that they don't stick. And this is really, really light snow, so I don't have to do a whole lot to get these traps ready to spring. But the less stuff you have on top of it, the better. I've had them snap on my fingers before, and it's not fun. So I'm very careful. And that's it for that trap. And it's ready to go. I'm just going to put a little bit of coyote urine on it, and we're done. All right, well, this is our last set for the day. I've got there'll be 8 sets total after it's all done. There's lots of blowdown, and also when Bruce came in and logged, there's lots of trees that are down, so you can see a lot of tracks from squirrels and some rabbits as well. So this just seems right. It feels right. There's enough you can see around us, but it's also on top of a ridge, and we also found tracks coming through here. So this is another area where it's a good set. These are nice because they're night latched, and what a night latch is it's a little groove in the dog, and so when you pull the trap pan out, it catches right into that groove. Got the southwest wind coming through, should blow all through here, and it's a good swirl area too, so we'll see what we can come up with here. Got a 45-degree angle of the hole itself. And that's it. Ready to go home. Thanks for joining us. It's a day's work. It's probably the most expensive coyote I've ever trapped. But we've got one, and I couldn't be happier, even with one coyote. I'm a happy guy today. Thanks for joining me, Jim Ryser, on Midwest Whitetail.
I want to dig into this topic of buck-to-doe ratio a little bit deeper with you, Jeremy. I talked about what my experience was when we really reversed it. What is considered to be like the healthy number, or what you'd consider to be, the ideal number on that buck-to-doe ratio?
I mean, most people target either a 1-to-1 or 1 buck to 2 does as the maximum. Usually, and that's where a lot of well-managed properties you find yourself in. But you do start straying kind of uncommonly from where you were to the 1 to 3 does, 1 to even 4 does on an adult side, and that's where you really start seeing the issues, not just in terms of my hunting quality, how's the rut, but in terms of the breeding season stretched when the fawns are dropping, and that all has a kind of a domino effect across the herd.
Yeah.
But the 1-to-1 to 1-to-2 is where we really look to be.
Yeah, and I think that on a statewide basis, I always felt like Iowa was somewhere in the 1-to-2 to 1-to-3 range. Over the years of just knocking on doors and getting permission, because we've always been a state that has a fair amount of acceptance of shooting does.
Sure. Absolutely.
We've shot a lot of does in Iowa, and people don't balk at that. Some states have a tradition where they don't like to shoot does because that's where the bucks come from,
Right.
et cetera. But Iowa has never been like that. So we've always maintained a fairly level buck-to-doe ratio, which is probably one of the reasons why the rut is always so much fun to hunt here over the years historically.
Absolutely.
Because I've hunted states like Michigan and places like that where I've hit herds where it's probably close to 1 to 10 or even sometimes higher.
Easily.
More does, 10 does for every buck or more.
Where I grew up in Pennsylvania, that's those traditional management areas where you pretty much shot the first legal buck that you saw. You saw 1 to 7, 1 to 8. And, a lot of those guys, we would talk about the rut, but really, they never even knew what the rut really was.
Right.
They never experienced what a true rut hunt, what the activity level could be like, because, 1 to 7, 1 to 8 ratio, there just wasn't a whole lot of activity.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that you run into is when you're trying to adjust that on a statewide level, they encourage you to shoot more does to bring it in line. Well, you really need to do 2 things. You need to shoot less bucks too.
Yeah.
Because otherwise what happens is you start shooting yourself in the foot.
Exactly.
'Cause then your whole herd starts to implode like we're talking about. You only shoot those does hard if you're backing off on everything else. Because you don't necessarily want to have a lot less deer.
Right.
You just want to balance things out.
Yeah.
So in the process of shooting more does, you got to shoot less bucks. And that's the tricky part.
And that's why a lot of those states, the Michigans, the Pennsylvanias, that were harder to manage on a statewide basis, put in antler restrictions, not just to recruit. A lot of people think, well, we just want to get older bucks and bigger bucks, and that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect is you've got to protect more bucks to balance that ratio out. And so that's not what a lot of hunters look at. They just think, oh, we want bigger bucks. Well, it's really balancing out that ratio. And you are seeing a lot more intense rutting activity in those states now because it's come down a little bit more in check.
Yeah, and that's the biggest challenge I'm sure that individual land managers face in those areas, and the statewide managers is trying to figure out not only how do we bring the doe number down a little bit, but bring the buck number down or up. To come, so keep that in mind. The experience we've got here, it only applies to certain situations. If you've got enough ground that you've got lumped up in a co-op, or maybe you own a lot, or you're in a part of a club, or maybe you're in a state that has a fairly equal buck-to-doe ratio to begin with, you can start looking at that 1 to 1 or that 1 to 1.5 or 1 to 2, whatever.
When you're talking about doe harvest, and it's a really important piece for landowners to recognize, is just because your state may have like unlimited antlerless harvest doesn't mean that you just need to shoot a ton of does on your property. You need to look at your local herd and what you're affecting, because if we're here, we don't need to be shooting 50 does off of the property when we're already at 1 to 1.25.
Right.
We have to have that balance maintained, and so it's really taking it into our hands and controlling what you can control within the realm of the state limit.
And I think that's where the cooperation between neighboring landowners really becomes a big deal. And we're going to talk more and more about that during the off-season series. We're going to try to profile some co-ops and really dig into this whole concept, because one of the things that's come up in the last couple of seasons is that deer management has gotten politicized. Where we don't have necessarily science-based decisions, we've got a lot of political-based decisions, and that can really throw a wrench into what we're trying to do as deer hunters. So the only way to bring that back under control is to look for ways to do it on a local scale.
Absolutely.
Because if the DNR has to fight the politics in order to manage the statewide herd. We have to take it into our own hands to balance the local herd.
Yeah, and if you look at the main bulk of the whitetail deer herd in North America, it's occurring on private land. And so there's that effect that private landowners can take it into their own hands within the state regulations to be able to maintain and balance and manage the populations. And that's what we have to do. And a lot of that, why we got so out of whack in the first place with buck-to-doe ratios and stuff is because we didn't. We kind of took it for granted.
Right.
So now everybody's starting to pull that back a little more, and we're starting to see more successful herds, and we're getting in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me today. We're supposed to have some warmer weather coming this next week, and I'm guessing we're going to lose all this snow. If that's the case, then we should be bringing you some more shed antler hunting in next week's episode, and if not, we'll continue to dive into these subjects that we love to cover during the off season, planning our food plots and breaking down some of these stand locations. I appreciate you joining me. We'll see you right back here again next week for the next episode of Midwest Whitetail. And remember to always dream big.